Do you find yourself constantly grabbing convenience food or hitting the drive-thru because of your busy schedule? Are you tired of your clothes not fitting and wish you felt more like yourself again? Does the word diet make you cringe because of past failed attempts that left you hungry and deprived? I'm Alisha, a wife, mom, fitness, nutrition, and lifestyle coach for women. After years of dieting, losing, and regaining the same weight, I realized I needed a new approach. I was burnt out from trying to be everything to everyone and chasing a number on the scale. To truly show up as the wife and mom I wanted to be and to finally find freedom in my health meant redefining my relationship to food, exercise, my body, and most importantly, to myself. I discovered the power of brain-based nutrition, fitness, habits, and routines to create a healthy lifestyle without restriction or deprivation. And now I'm excited to share everything I've learned with you. If you're ready to follow a simple brain-based nutrition and fitness plan built on habits and routines designed for busy moms and women, you're in the right place. Let's do this together. Okay, real talk. You used to be able to predict your body's monthly rhythms. Maybe not perfectly, but there was definitely a rhythm. You kind of knew what to expect week by week, which weeks or which days you felt like you could deadlift like the Hulk, and which days a walk around the block felt like a personal victory. It made sense, even if it was annoying at times, but you kind of knew what to expect. And now you find your motivation kind of showing up off and on, maybe a little bit unexpected at times. You can't necessarily predict the good days anymore. You can't even predict the bad days. Sometimes it feels like there's no rhyme or reason, no pattern, and it's just a daily vibe check. And sometimes the vibe check definitely isn't there. So today we're talking about why that's happening, not just cycle syncing in the way that you're used to hearing about it, but the actual physiology of why your motivation feels like it's just random at times. What's different about this phase of life versus your 20s and 30s, and most importantly, what you can do about it. Because here's the thing that I need you to know going in: understanding the mechanism is not the same thing as surrendering to it. We are not here to blame our hormones. We are not here to throw up our hands or play the victim, but we are here to understand what our body is doing so that we can adapt, overcome, and work with our bodies. We are focusing on playing the offense today. All right. So I want you to kind of put yourself in this position. You go in to do the thing that you normally do, the workout, the walk, the meal prep, whatever it is that you're showing up for. And some weeks your brain just will not cooperate. You're not tired exactly. You're not lazy. You're just feeling kind of blah and unmotivated in a way that doesn't seem to match up with what you've got scheduled on your calendar that week. Your sleep, your to-do list, it's all just kind of feeling like a bit too much. You might have found that when you were younger, maybe in your 20s or 30s, it used to sort of track with your cycle, or you could just kind of rally and go and rise to the occasion. But now your energy level, your motivation, your mood maybe doesn't really seem to track as neatly as it used to with your monthly cycle. And so likely you're doing what every high achieving, have it all together woman does, and you just make it about your character, right? About who you are as a person. Maybe I'm losing my discipline. I used to be able to push through this. What is wrong with me lately? You start collecting, your brain starts collecting all this evidence for a case against you that your hormones, not your willpower, are actually building, right? So I need you to hear that. It's not your willpower that's failing. It's actually something that's happening hormonally. And that's the big part that I actually want to maybe push back on a little bit, is that you deserve to understand what's happening in your own body instead of just sitting there quietly assuming that there's something wrong with you, that you are somehow broken. Confusion plus shame is a terrible combination. And it's the combination that most women are sort of finding themselves in perimenopause, because nobody really explained what's happening hormonally and how that affects their mood, their motivation, and just their will to get up and do something. We get all the symptoms, but we don't necessarily get the why and what's driving it. So this might come as a shock to some of you. Hopefully not, because I am human. But I think sometimes we can look at people that are maybe in the fitness world and we think, oh my gosh, like they must be so disciplined. They never miss a day. They always must just like love working out. And for the most part, I really do enjoy getting up, getting a workout in, and moving my body. But I am human. And there are definitely some days that I am like having this internal argument as I'm walking myself out to the garage to do a workout or as I'm putting my shoes on. There are some days that my own motivation goes MIA and I have to not rely on the motivation and how I feel, but really lean more into that identity piece. So it's not just that, one day it's going to all click. I think that there are definitely some times that we feel more motivated, that we feel less motivated. Some of that is or can be contributed to our hormones and what's going on there. And I think once we kind of understand that, it becomes less of like a bad or a negative thing about that about us. So I want to kind of dive into some of the actual research, the hormone stuff, sort of the endocrinology, and not just necessarily like the fluff, because we want to know what's real, what's really happening, and how we can work with our bodies, meet ourselves where we're at, and then figure out what the next move is there. So let's get into it. So, how this might have worked before, there was a predictable rhythm. So, in your 20s and your 30s, your cycle ran on a pretty dependable feedback loop. Maybe early in your cycle, a hormone called FSH, it tells your ovaries to start ripening an egg. And as that happens, estrogen rises in a fairly predictable curve. Estrogen peaks, your brain fires off a surge of LH, which is that luteinizing hormone. You ovulate, and the leftover structure left behind produces progesterone for the second half of your cycle. If there's no pregnancy, progesterone drops, you get your period, and then that whole monthly loop starts over. That loop is why the cycle syncing concept exists in the first place. It's a real measurable rhythm that happens in a woman's body month in and month out. But predictable does not always mean that it is symptom free. Plenty of women had real PMS in that system, but it was at least a known wave. You could kind of see it coming, you could predict it. What starts happening in perimenopause is that it becomes a little bit less predictable. So here is kind of what might be explaining if you feel like you're just sort of all over the place and you can't quite put your finger on where you're at in your monthly cycle. Perimenopause is not just about less estrogen. Now, that's the headline that really gets the most clicks. That really does seem to be the thing that's getting the most attention right now. And it's kind of incomplete. What's actually happening is that ovulation is becoming less and less reliable. So you start having more cycles where you don't maybe ovulate at all. And by late perimenopause, the majority of your monthly cycles are actually non-ovulatory. When you don't ovulate, you don't build the structure that makes progesterone. So progesterone is often the first hormone to really start to fall off, sometimes years before your estrogen levels do anything dramatic. Meanwhile, estrogen isn't quietly declining because your brain is working harder to get your ovaries to respond. Estrogen can actually spike higher than your normal reproductive peak in some cycles, and then it can crash harder in others. So it's not necessarily just a smooth slope down. It can be a much rockier, much less predictable ride. That's the actual difference between a regular cycle and maybe a cycle in perimenopause. It's not just less of the hormones, it's more of a chaos or more chaotic in the hormones. Bigger swings, less rhythm, less warning. So why fluctuation and not just the level of your hormones is what hits your mood and motivation. Here's the piece that you might not have heard before, or that maybe it hasn't been explained to you very well. And it's the whole reason that we're doing this episode. Researchers studying women in the menopause transition found that it wasn't the actual amount of estrogen in a woman's body that predicted her mood and depressive symptoms. It was how much her estrogen estrogen was fluctuating from week to week. So the more erratic or kind of chaotic and crazy the swing, the worse the mood symptoms and the bigger the stress response, regardless of whether her overall estrogen was high or low that week. A follow up study found that women whose mood was more sensitive to those swings were more likely to develop depressive symptoms later in the transition, especially women earlier in perimenopause without a prior history of depression. So, in other words, this is not a personal failing or a sign that you're more broken than all the women you see on Instagram or YouTube that seem like they never miss a Monday. It's a measurable sensitivity to hormonal volatility, and it's more common than you might realize. So when your motivation feels unpredictable, it's genuinely is unpredictable on a biological level. You're not just imagining that. You are living inside a bigger, choppier wave than what you used to ride in your 20s and 30s. So quick biology, and then we move. Estrogen isn't just a woman's hormone. It directly supports serotonin and dopamine, which are the neurotransmitters behind your mood and your motivation. Estrogen helps your brain make more serotonin, hang on to it longer, and build more receptors for it. It does something similar for dopamine, which is your brain's reward and motivation chemical. It's the thing that actually makes you want to get up and do the thing that makes a goal feel worth chasing. So when estrogen is swinging wildly instead of rising and falling in a predictable wave, your brain's motivation chemistry is getting dragged along for the ride. That dip you feel where the workout you normally enjoy either feels pointless or you just cannot find any motivation to get up and do it is not a discipline problem. There's actually things happening neurochemically that are influencing this. Now, this isn't just theoretical. Researchers have actually measured exercise motivation across hormone phases in regularly cycling women, and they found a lower motivation and a harder perceived effort during those lower hormone phases of a normal cycle compared to when the hormones are higher and they're in that phase. That's in women with a predictable regular cycle. Now take the same mechanism and put it inside perimenopause's bigger, less predictable swings, and it would track that the dips would hit harder and maybe show up with less warning. Okay, but here is where I want to kind of step back a little bit, and we want to just stop getting into more information and really look at like, how do we apply this and how do we coach through this? Because understanding what's going on and why it's happening only matters if it changes how we show up and how we respond on those days that we are not feeling motivated at all. We're going to look at this in 3 different moves. So move 1 is to, of course, first and foremost, just stop waiting until we feel motivated to do the thing. We want to stop building any of our habits, any of our routines, any of our systems based solely on how we feel, whether we feel motivated or not. Motivation was never a reliable foundation, even in our predictable years, and it becomes even less reliable now. So we want to instead focus on building on our non-negotiables, make them small enough that they don't require a feeling to show up. Now, the caveat here is that for a lot of us, that can be really hard. It can feel like a 10-minute walk. What good is that going to do? 5 minutes of this, like how big of a difference is that going to be? I was just talking to a doctor and she kind of talks about this approach that she takes, and it's little by little eventually becomes a lot. So 10 minutes here, 5 minutes there, it all adds up, it all counts. So the goal on a hard week isn't necessarily to keep your intensity the same as the days that you're feeling more motivated or on the easier weeks. It's to focus on maintaining consistency and continuity. Move 2 is to name the wave instead of just arguing with yourself about it. So when you're feeling unmotivated, the move is not to go to what's wrong with me. It's maybe, okay, here, let's use feeling unmotivated or that lack of motivation as a signal, as the light on your car dash that something is going on. Maybe it's your hormones are all over the place, a little bit erratic, and we're just going to use that feeling as information, not on a verdict of your character, and certainly not going to let those feelings win and ultimately drive the car. That single reframe can take the shame completely out of the equation. And we know that shame and guilt, and when we're kind of like punishing ourselves and being really hard on ourselves, that never fuels consistency for the long term anyway. Move three, and this is important, so I want you to kind of lean in on this, is we don't replace one rigid system with another. So I am not telling you to just try harder to build like a more strict or regimented protocol around your cycle. One actual research group studying cycle based training found that a woman's motivation to show up mattered more for her results than which phase of her cycle she trained in. So I think a lot of times with the cycle syncing conversation and information out there, we can use it in a way that's maybe not super helpful. And truthfully, there's not even a ton of research that fully supports, that there are even different cycles to train in or, different ways that we should be eating. However, a lot of women's real lived experiences would indicate otherwise. And so that's where that N of one actually might be more reliable than leaning on what the research says. However, when we look at the why behind what we are doing, that can oftentimes be a bigger predictor of our motivation, especially our motivation to show up on the hard days, on the days that we don't feel like it, than where we're at in our cycle. So again, the answer isn't to just be more rigid, be more strict. It's actually to lean in and be a little bit more intuitive, listening to your body, more responsive training paired with those non-negotiables that are low enough that you can hit them even when you have zero motivation. Okay, so if you're sitting here thinking, okay, but how do I actually build a routine that survives my own kind of unpredictable life or, my motivation ebbing and flowing? And that is genuinely what we do inside Fit and Fueled. It's not a rigid plan that falls apart the second life takes a crazy turn or we have a rough week. It's a framework that is really built for your body in your life the way that it actually is right now, not the one that you had in your 20s or your 30s. And if you're not quite ready to dive into coaching, that's totally fine. We have a lower commitment starting point first, which is our Fit and Fueled Foundation. It's a micro course that is designed to get you moving on the identity, the habit piece, and some of those bigger rocks before you really dive all the way in. If you keep waiting for motivation that as you're coming into perimenopause is genuinely less predictable than it used to be, and every time it doesn't show up, you just put that in the category of I'm failing, eventually you just kind of quietly quit and you stop showing up at all on the hard weeks altogether, not because you're lazy, but because maybe feeling that shame or beating yourself up, it just kind of took you out of the game. And that is really the thing that inconsistency. So, here is why it's so important to get out of that self blame loop or to just cave in to the motivation, whether it's there or it's not, is if we keep waiting for the motivation, which eventually just becomes less and less predictable than it used to be. If we wait for that to show up, a lot of times what we end up doing is just blaming ourselves and filing it away as a fail. Eventually, we might just stop showing up altogether because the shame that we feel for not showing up and for quitting again just becomes too much. The actual tragedy is that inconsistency was never the problem. Waiting on motivation was. I want you to imagine instead that there's a hard motivation week that shows up where you're just not feeling motivated at all. And instead of just spiraling or throwing in the towel in and giving in to not feeling motivated, you just notice it. It's like, okay, I'm riding that wave again. Maybe you do the 10 minutes instead of the 60, and you don't sit there and beat yourself up for not measuring up and not doing the whole thing. You stop needing to feel ready to be consistent. And that right there is not a small shift. That's not something to just kind of brush aside and ignore. That really is the difference between a woman who quit quits every time life gets crazy, her hormones are out of whack, and the woman who's learned to keep taking the next step regardless of the noise. Now, if your faith is a part of how you frame this, that's a version of being steady even when your circumstances aren't. And there's something that is deeply freeing about that. So here's your homework for this week. The next time motivation goes missing, don't ask what's wrong with me. Don't blame yourself. Don't beat yourself up. Maybe you just ask what's the smallest version of this thing that I can still manage to do. And that's it. You just take the next smallest step. You build on little by little until it becomes a lot. And then you wash, rinse, and repeat. That really is the whole assignment. So yes, our hormones get a vote in this season of life, meaning they are going to be maybe doing some different things than what we're used to, but we don't have to be the victim. We don't have to fall prey to that. This really is about us stepping in and playing the offense rather than feeling like we're just constantly stuck in defense mode with our body and all of the changes that are happening in this season. So hopefully this episode gave you a different perspective on the cycle syncing and how when you're feeling motivated some days and some days you're not, it's not that there's something wrong with you. It's just that there's something going on in your body that could be to blame. And instead of us just playing the victim to that, let's be empowered to just take the next best step. All right. I hope that this blessed you. I hope it encourages you to just keep moving forward towards your goals and your fitness. All right. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. We will catch you next week. Until then, bye.
Thanks for tuning in to The Strong Her Way. If you're ready to redefine your relationship with food, exercise, and yourself, remember, it's all about building habits and routines that fit into your busy life without restriction or deprivation. I hope today's episode inspired you to take the next step on your journey to a healthier, happier you. Don't forget to follow the show so you never miss an episode. And if you found this helpful, please leave a review and share it with other women who need a little extra encouragement. Together, we can all become stronger. Until next time, stay strong and keep moving forward.